Hello everyone, good evening and welcome to tonight's Let's Talk Preteen session, which is dedicated to looking at life with our 9 to 12-year-olds. My name is Chloe Pope and I'm from the Safety and Resilience Consultancy, and along with my colleague Emma Stevens, we'll be facilitating tonight's session, which has been commissioned and supported by the Community Safety Partnership. Our Safety and Resilience Consultancy is a partnership set up to support you with the challenges of looking after your children and your young people. As you can see on your screens tonight, we will be covering more challenges that your preteens face as they enter their teenage years. Tonight, we'll be focusing on relationships, exploitation, pornography, and stereotypes. Next week is our final session within the preteen series, where we'll be covering online and physical risks, safety planning, and self-care. You may have joined tonight as you've attended some of our previous sessions, so welcome back. And you may already know the format of tonight, but for anyone new joining us, a very warm welcome. I'll just quickly go over a few guidelines. So due to the large volume of us on the platform, it can make the IT a little bit temperamental. You will see that your cameras are off and your mics are muted. This does mean that unfortunately Emma and I cannot respond to raised hands during the session. However, the chat bar is open, so please do put any comments or questions in. This is a really great platform for supporting each other. If you have used a service or have some tools that have worked for you and your family, please do share this information. However, we all know that every family is different, so just because something worked for you and your family doesn't necessarily mean that it will work for everyone else. Very kindly, Rebecca Hewitt and Claire Birch from the Community Safety Partnership are with us this evening, and they will do their best to monitor the chat and pass over any questions to Emma and myself to answer. However, sometimes it can be a little bit difficult to present the session tonight and give appropriate answers, and that's because there may be a question that needs a little bit more thought rather than a quick public reply. If that is the case, please be assured that we won't be ignoring your question and we will respond by email to you. We do ask that you please be respectful of each other, and for confidentiality reasons, please do not give any names or identifying features of children or young people, even if they are your own. Due to this confidentiality, the session tonight is being recorded. However, your names or identifying information or comments will not be included in this recording. Certificates are available should you want one, and the email for this will be shared at the end of tonight's session. And finally, our toolkit that accompanies these sessions will be shared with you again via email. Some of the content that we'll share tonight may be difficult for you to hear. We can't apologise for this, as it is important that you know what your children and young people are facing. But one positive of being at home and listening remotely on the sofa is that you can mute us, take a break, and when you return, we're likely to have moved on. This is a great way for looking after yourselves. Being responsible for small humans is hard work, and to do a good job of this, you need to look after yourselves. So let's get started. We know that moving from little school to big school also comes with some really big changes. Maybe one of the biggest being all of those new people and potentially new friends that your young people will be surrounded by. As parents of primary school children, we often know all of their friends. We know all about what's going on in their days and who they're associating with. But as they enter secondary school, we can be left feeling a little bit in the dark with who they're spending most of their days with. We also now have slightly less control over who their friends are. However, it's okay to still want to know who is involved in their lives. Ongoing conversations about their new friends show that you care and will give you an insight into their world. It's also really important to know who they surround themselves with in order to be aware of any additional pressures that may come with this, and to try and get to know what kind of influence their friends may be having on them, whether this be positive or maybe not so much. The friends they make in secondary school really could last a lifetime. So how can we support our young people in making and maintaining those positive friendships? Well, firstly, try and be supportive of their new friends, as long, of course, that they are positive friendships. Making friends is really, really difficult for our children and young people, and it's lovely that someone wants to be friends with your child. That must show all of those really lovely qualities that they have and you've nurtured throughout their life. Encouraging them to invite their friends over or go out with them can be really supportive to support that blossoming new friendship. But also do make sure to give them space. If and when you get to meet any new friends, try not to bombard the friend with all of those questions. Get to know them, yes, of course, but also give your young person space with their new friends. Think about how you might feel if every time your best mate popped around for a cup of tea, your child was sat in the room asking them all sorts of questions about their life. They may want to spend all evening in their bedroom with their door shut, and that absolutely is okay. Try not to worry about this. Privacy is something that they're starting to strive for now that they're growing up. Try and be non-judgmental. Try not to pass comment on their new friends, unless, of course, you are really worried about them. We know that making negative comments about their friends is never likely to have a positive outcome. Could result in them shutting down and not being open with you. But do make sure to be that secure base. If anything does go wrong, make sure that they know that they can come to you, whether that's for things like advice or something kind of more serious like bullying. Even though they're becoming teenagers, they still need you. We know that friendships require work, they require hard work, but something that we might take for granted now that we're adults and we've really navigated this journey of making friends. There's likely to be wobbles in their friendships, there's likely to be arguments, there's likely to be tears. This doesn't necessarily mean that their friends are bad people, just that they're also learning to navigate life. So be there for your young person when they need advice or just that shoulder to cry on. And finally, role model. It takes a lot of skills and hard work to maintain friendships. So show them how you're a good friend and how to be a good friend themselves too. Role model nurturing your own relationships, spending time with your friends, being supportive and forgiving where appropriate. So, your young person is now nice and settled into secondary school. They've made some new friends, they're entering puberty, and they're starting to find that independence. Any guesses as to what might come next? Relationships, of course, that wonderful world of teenage romance, first love, but also first breakups. I'm sure that we can all remember those. Throughout all of these sessions, you'll notice that we'll keep coming back to communication and having those open and those honest conversations. Relationships are especially important to discuss, and before they start entering into those relationships, if you can. Relationships can absolutely be the greatest joy, or they can be the greatest misery of our lives, and that includes our teenagers too. It's important that young people understand healthy relationships and what they may look like. TV shows can be a good starting point for this so that it doesn't feel too embarrassing or too uncomfortable for your child or for you. So after watching a video clip or programme on the TV, you could think about the following. Would they like to be treated in this way? Why or why not? What would they do in that scenario? What could the couple on the TV show do differently? And what qualities would they like to have in their partner? And if your child already does have a relationship, talk to them about it. Try and think about what you need to know. So you might need to know how they met or how old their partner is, but also show interest to encourage open discussions and making them aware that they can come to you if they need to. You could ask your child questions like, how do they treat you? What is it that you like best about them? And what do you like doing with them? Your young person really is likely to feel embarrassed being asked these questions, but that's okay. It's important that they understand that it's normal and fine to talk about their relationships openly and honestly with you. So I'm going to spend some time now talking about unhealthy and abusive relationships. So if this sounds like it may be a triggering subject for you, please do feel free to mute me and rejoin me in about 10 minutes' time. So we couldn't talk about this topic tonight without acknowledging how sad we feel about the recent incident in Croydon. Although we don't want to make any assumptions about what happened, it appears likely that the 17-year-old that was arrested was known to the 15-year-old victim. Although we're not talking about 15-year-olds tonight, we saw last week just how quickly our children turn into young adults. We're also aware that it's very likely that 10, 11 and 12-year-olds would have been on that bus. Remember to look after yourself when listening to these types of news stories, which are incredibly upsetting, and Emma and I felt deeply sad to hear of this news. However, unhealthy or toxic relationships are important to be aware of as parents, as our young people enter into romantic relationships. And this is because research shows that young people between the ages of 13 and 24 are at the highest risk of domestic abuse. 49% of boys and 33% of girls aged between 13 and 14 thought that hitting a partner would be okay in some scenarios. 25% of girls and 18% of boys aged between 13 and 17 years old reported having experienced some form of physical violence from an intimate partner. So just have a moment to think about those statistics. You'll notice that all of those statistics that I said all start with the age of 13, which hopefully your young person hasn't quite reached yet if you're here with us tonight. So the key here is prevention. Start having those open conversations now about how they deserve to be treated and how they should treat other people. It can be really, really easy to shy away from a subject like this, especially if we don't really know much about the area ourselves. So how can we start to talk about unhealthy relationships? Well, I think it's really important that we start with what domestic abuse actually is. So according to the legal definition of domestic abuse is defined as an incident or a pattern of incidents of controlling, coercive, threatening, degrading, or violent behaviour. So on your screen now, you will see the power and control wheel. So the power and control wheel shows all of the different ways that an abusive person may gain power and control in an intimate relationship. We feel that the power and control wheel can be a really good place to start kind of talking about this subject, especially for those older preteens, so kind of thinking about the ages of 11 and 12. The power and control wheel really shows young people that unhealthy or abusive relationships don't necessarily mean physical violence, which is often what can be commonly thought of when we say the words domestic abuse. The power and control wheel is in our toolkit, which you will get emailed a copy of after tonight's session, so don't worry too much about memorising section by section. I'm not going to go through every section now, but I just really want to highlight the most common areas that we might see within abusive teen relationships. So starting with using intimidation, which is at the top of the wheel, this means using scary behaviour. So behaviour that would leave someone feeling fearful, walking on eggshells, or maybe scared to put a foot wrong. So this can be something as simple as the way that they look at the other person to damaging property. So especially within our teenage relationships, we often see things being thrown at the wall or punches thrown at a wall. Then another common one that we see within our teenage relationships is isolation, just to the right on your screen. So in terms of young people's relationships, this will often involve them making the other partner feel bad about seeing their friends, for example. However, do try and remember that within teenage relationships, they often want to spend all of their time with their new partner. But isolation is very different here because there will be some level of fear involved. So the victim in the relationship would likely to feel scared as to what would happen if they didn't spend all of their time with their partner. Then we've got using coercion and threats. Coercive control only actually became a crime in 2015. It's obviously something that has always been around, but it involves more of a pattern of behaviours rather than one-off incidents. So the pattern normally results in the abusive behaviours getting worse and worse as time goes on and can really leave that victim to feel quite trapped. Commonly in young people's relationships, we may see a threat of suicide. So, for example, if the victim was to end that relationship, then the abusive person may threaten to end their own life, which is obviously a huge pressure on that victim within the relationship. Other behaviours that we might see under kind of that banner of using coercion and threats might be making threats or carrying them out. And that might be the threat to send nude pictures, for example, or spread rumours about the other person. So the aim here really isn't to scare you, but just to inform you. Remember that according to those statistics that I started with, it's much more likely that your young person will enter a healthy relationship rather than an unhealthy one. But it is important that they are aware that those unhealthy relationships do exist and what they look like, so they can look out for these signs in their own future relationships. We discuss this will being kind of an important starting place for our older preteens and teens. So for our younger preteens, come back to those open-ended questions about relationships and linking it to a movie or a TV show if appropriate, and make sure that they're aware of how they should be treated and how they should treat others. I'm going to hand over to Emma now, who's going to talk you through exploitation. Emma.
Thank you, Chloe. Hi, everybody. I hope that you're all okay. We did warn you that tonight was a tough night. We are going to move on to quite some scary subjects now. So we're going to...
Emma, if I could just stop you a second. Your voice is sounding very robotic to me. I don't know if it is to other people on the call, but it's quite difficult to understand you.
Yeah, it is to me too. Try again, Emma.
Can you hear me any better now?
No, I'm afraid it's still quite robotic.
Okay, Chloe, are you able to take over from me and I'll leave and then come back?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I hope you're all not too sick of my voice just yet. So like I said, we're going to spend a bit of time talking about exploitation now. So we want to look at all the different ways in which children may be exploited. Although the types of exploitation and the language that we use can change, the basic premise will stay the same. An adult targeting a child and abusing their power for their own needs. Whether that be sexual exploitation, labour exploitation, or criminal exploitation in county lines, your children should never be blamed for the abuse they experience. The child's behaviour and response is not the crime. Child exploitation will always be the crime. Tonight, we want to explore what is happening in the wider community. So a lot of you with us tonight will live in Devon. Devon is a really great place to live, and according to Devon County Council figures in 2020, 10% of our population is made up between 10 to 19-year-olds. Not all and retired people then, as we were often led to believe. We have the highest number of children's homes per head of the population in England, and we have over 800 children living in local authority care. That equates to a lot of families that are potentially struggling. But as we will see tonight, it's not only the families that services know about that we need to be aware of. 313,000 children in the UK are thought to be involved in criminal activity, but only a really small percentage of those are already working with services. It's a growing concern for all of our children. Please don't be drawn into a false sense of security that it's just those who already live in challenging situations or areas, or those with additional vulnerabilities. This really can and absolutely does affect any family.
Chloe, we're not sick of your voice yet, but I'm just wondering if you can hear me any better now.
Yeah, we can. Do you want to take over?
Do you want me to start talking, Chloe?
Thanks, Emma.
Apologies, everyone. I hope you can hear me now. Please, somebody, Becca or Claire, do jump in if you can't hear me. So you will probably have heard the expression county lines from the news, or from social media or from safety campaigns, etc. And your children will most certainly have had some information from their school about it. But as parents, you might not have had much detail shared with you, yet you are, as always, the front line in security and protecting your teenagers. So county lines is a form of criminal exploitation where criminal gangs persuade, coerce or force children and young people to either store items or transport them to suburban areas such as our coastal towns. So when we're talking about storing items, we're thinking about drugs, weapons and money. And this is where living in Devon with our great rail network isn't always so great. You know, some places in Devon, such as Exeter, Teignmouth and Dawlish, are perfect target areas for this type of activity. The trains are actually really quite good down in South Devon. So county lines is an issue that can lead to serious physical and emotional harm to our young people. We are seeing younger and younger children being approached to carry drugs and knives, and this is because they're less likely to be stopped by the police and they are much easier to coerce and threaten. There are now cases of 5- and 6-year-old children in larger cities such as London and Manchester being targeted and recruited by these gangs. And quite often what we see in Devon is that we follow these big cities a few years later. The Children's Society website tells us the harrowing story of a 7-year-old who had a drug debt of over £1,000, and this led to a threat on his life. And as we said, gangs like these younger children, these new recruits, because these children have got no previous criminal history. They often refer to these young people as clean skins, so young people with no prior police involvement and often from families who aren't involved with any services or agencies, quite possibly your children. So, for example, your children might start going to parties in the next few years, parties that aren't organised by the parents or that you're not at. And at these parties, they might be offered something to smoke, maybe some weed, and they accept this and they smoke it, assuming that it's free. They then get asked to pay for it, and they get asked to pay an overinflated price. Your children have got no money on them, but the friend that gave it to them wants paying now, and they threaten them if they can't pay. So your child may be offered another way to pay off this debt, such as selling more drugs to another friend. And lots of young people who get into real trouble this way are just too embarrassed and can't bring themselves to ask their friends or parents for support. They may feel that their parents have enough money worries and they don't want to ask for any more money than they need to. They may receive threats from the gang, such as, I know where your little sister goes to school, or I know where you live. And in this way, they are going to be coerced into carrying and delivering more things. Gang leaders are very clever at not enabling our young people to leave. It might be that your child agrees to do one job. So, for example, they might drop a packet to somebody, but then on the way to dropping that packet, they get mugged. And then they end up owing the gang the money for what they lost and the money for what they should have picked up. We know that that mugger is part of the gang. And now your young person probably owes hundreds of pounds to that gang. Any child can get involved very quickly into something that they cannot get out of. So as well as being used to transport drugs, county lines gangs may also sexually abuse and exploit our children. And this can happen through children being groomed into what they believe is a romantic relationship. We also do need to understand that horrible realization that sometimes gangs are attractive and exciting to our children. If you think about movies such as The Fast and the Furious or games that they play online on their Xbox, etc., gangs are always portrayed as glamorous and edgy, all the things that are very attractive to our young people. The St Giles Trust is an organisation that supports vulnerable young people who are at risk of or who are escaping from exploitation. And many of their team of workers are people who have previously led the kind of life that we're talking about. And they've done some extensive research about why young people are sometimes drawn more into this way of life. And one of the biggest reasons was money. Maybe not surprising, but actually for boys, it really was the main attraction, whereas it wasn't for most of the girls, unless they felt that they needed to support their families more. But any quick search of Instagram or Snapchat will show you hundreds of images of children and young people literally covering themselves in cash. Money is really attractive to young people, especially children who feel that peer pressure to have the latest trainers or the latest tickets to somewhere. There aren't enough good enough jobs that pay teenagers a decent wage, and the pressure on you as families right now in the cost of living means that very few of us have got limitless money to satisfy needs of our children, and criminal activity can appear to pay very well. And finally, something to do was another reason that gang members gave for joining. There's nothing else to do. I was bored. We looked at brain development and puberty a little bit last week and how we need to be constantly challenging our children. And this week, the message is the same. Keep your children busy. Get them into sports, watching or playing, watch Netflix together, sign them up to anything and everything, because a sense of belonging is still what most children are looking for when they join up to gangs. So please take any opportunity to open up these conversations with your children. Talk about movies you've watched. Point out any drug stories in the media where things have ended up way less than glamorous. And we need to remember that once a child becomes part of a county lines gang, their loyalty and commitment is going to be tested. So the gang are going to start to trap the child, as you can see, by making them feel powerless to leave. This might include threats of violence if they leave, making the child feel like they're betraying their new family, or telling the child that they'll get into trouble if they seek help because they've committed a criminal offence. A great time to just keep reminding our children that whatever news they've got to tell you, you're going to be okay with hearing that news. I'm going to move on a little bit now onto the horrible subject. Again, it's all horrible subjects tonight. I'm so sorry. We're just going to talk for a minute about sexual abuse. Media and social media coverage of sexual abuse investigations have greatly increased, mainly through the high profile cases of celebrities and footballers. If we think Russell Brand's been in the news very recently. But every year in England, it is reported that over 75,000 children are raped or sexually abused. So this includes children who have been abducted, trafficked, or coerced and threatened into having sex. So child sexual exploitation is the same as any form of exploitation. It's when we see adults using their power over children. And this power may result from a difference in age, a difference in intellect, a difference in money, or that position of higher authority. People often think of child exploitation in terms of organised crime, but it also covers domestic abuse and may involve informal exchanges of something a child wants or needs, such as gifts, money, accommodation, or attention. Many children are groomed by partners who then force them into sexual activity with their friends and associates. And this leads to shame and embarrassment around reporting, as many children and adults don't always see this as a crime. It starts as a relationship. And this is part of the challenge around sexual exploitation. Does your child understand consent and what consent means? So consent can be a really difficult concept to define, but it is defined as a person agreeing to something by choice. So they have the freedom and the capacity to make that choice. I don't know if any of you have seen the cup of tea consent clip. That is a great one to show teenagers, but it may be a bit confusing to some of our younger children. And it also depends on how far you want those conversations to go at this stage. All of our children and you will be at different stages in these conversations. So we're going to show you a quick clip now around consent, which is a great one to show your younger children.
Consent for kids. This is you. Okay, it doesn't look exactly like you, but let's say it's you. This is your body, and you get to decide what you do with your body. No one else is entitled to tell you what to do with your body. Not your friends, not strangers, not adults you know. No one is entitled to decide what you do with your body, except you. That's called bodily autonomy, by the way. And that's what consent is all about. Everyone is different. Some people love to hug, and some people hate hugs. And each person gets to decide what they're comfortable with. Can a hug-loving person just start hugging someone at random? Nope. They need consent. How do people know if they have consent? They ask. Would you like a hug?
Yes, I would. Can I hold your hand?
I'd rather not.
Okay.
If a person doesn't say yes,
Can I hug you?
then they haven't given their consent. It's really pretty simple. Ask for consent, listen to the answer. By the way, if a person bribes someone or threatens someone to say yes, that's not consent. Sometimes adults will try to tell a kid what to do with their body.
Go kiss Aunt Doris goodbye.
But the kid still gets to decide. No thanks, that makes me uncomfortable. I'll just wave goodbye. Some things kids can't consent to. They can't enter into legal contracts. They can't vote. And they can't consent to sexual stuff, 'cause they're kids. So if an adult does something that kids can't consent to, that's not okay. The adult is wrong, and it's not the kid's fault. And that's when it's most important to tell a trusted adult, like a teacher. Why? Because it's your body, and no one else is entitled to tell you what to do with it. Practice consent.
Nice, simple, just a quick one that you could quite easily watch with younger children. So yet another tough subject coming up tonight. We're just going to talk for a little bit about pornography. Research shows us that anyone online can be 6 clicks or less away from seeing inappropriate or harmful content online. Try it out. Type in something totally appropriate that your child might search for, and then follow the links and see where it takes you. So research commissioned by a children's safety group showed the strength of these algorithms. So the ones used by social media companies that are based on a user's activity. So for example, if you think about your Facebook or your Twitter and the kind of adverts that come up, they are targeted to you based on your previous searches. So whilst an 11-year-old boy just Googling random stuff may be targeted with some age-appropriate material, such as courses or sportswear, he's also likely to be targeted with highly sexual content, just because he's a 12-year-old boy. So your 11-year-old clicking on a recipe that's labelled healthy eating follows the next link, and they may be targeted with diet tips. Then they click the next link and the link after that, and they see an eating disorder site, totally distorting their image of a healthy body and not at all what they were looking for. Bernardo's reports that the average age for a child's first exposure to online pornography is around 11 years of age, with the youngest exposure as early as 5. And I know you might not want to hear this, but children under 14 account for nearly 20% of regular Pornhub users. So porn is like any other addictive drug, and it affects our children's brains in that same way. Deep inside your brain, there's something called a reward centre. So you've got one, so if your children's naturally, so's your dog. And the reward centre's job is to release pleasure chemicals into your brain when you do something that's good for you, like eating tasty food, doing a hard workout, or enjoying a kiss with somebody. That high you get from that chemical rush makes you want to repeat that behaviour again and again. So thanks to this reward centre, your brain is hardwired to motivate you to do something that will improve your health and ultimately your chances of survival. It's a great system. Normally, the problem is that your brain can be tricked. So when addictive substances are used, they're giving your brain a false signal. And since the brain can't tell the difference between the drugs and a real healthy reward, it goes ahead anyway and activates this reward centre. So an important chemical called dopamine is released, which makes the brain start developing a craving for that reward, fake or otherwise. Your brain can't tell. As long as there's a lot of this dopamine floating around in your brain, the cravings are going to get stronger, and we'll feel that super motivation to keep pursuing more of that drug. So essentially, we need to think about addictive drugs hijacking the brain, turning our brains around and forcing it into a direction it was never meant to go. So instead of leading us towards healthy behaviours, drugs lead us to things that aren't healthy at all and can be dangerous. And do you want to guess what else does that? Pornography. So researchers have found that internet porn and addictive substances like tobacco have very similar effects on our brains. Dopamine cells stop firing after repeated consumption, but addictions go right on increasing these dopamine levels without giving the brain a break. So what that means, and what most of us realise, is that the more drugs we take, the more we need. And that's why drug addicts find it so hard to stop once they've taken that first hit. And porn stimulates the same areas of the brain as these addictive drugs, making the brain release the same chemicals. And just like drugs, porn triggers pathways into the brain that cause cravings, leading users to go back for more and more extreme hits to get high. Just like when we take drugs and we build up a tolerance, we need newer, more hardcore porn for the same effects. So the next slide is going to show us actually what is available right now from your friendly internet provider. So this is that endless stream of fresh images delivered at high speed in vivid colour, possibly 24/7. Well, it is 24/7. Before porn users even start to get bored, they can always give themselves another dopamine boost just by clicking on something else, which is going to be something more hardcore than before. And we've said porn consumption follows the same predictable pattern that's very similar to drug use. And we try so hard, don't we, to try and protect our children all the time from drugs. You can't buy cigarettes, you can't buy alcohol, you can't buy paracetamol without proving your age. But approximately only 3% of pornographic websites currently require you to prove your age before viewing. And a huge 45% of the most common sites do not even include any adult content warnings.
I think Emma's frozen, Chloe. Emma, I think you're back.
Emma, are you back?
I'm back. I don't know what it is tonight, everyone. I don't know if it's the weather or... Am I back?
Yep, you're back with us, Emma.
Sorry, everybody. I don't know if it's the weather or what tonight. The internet connection keeps tipping out. I'm so sorry. So if we look at something from the Internet Watch Foundation, 2018, they removed 105,000 web pages which showed sexual abuse of children. And the online porn industry is suggested to be worth over £97 billion. So actually protecting your children is probably not top of that industry's priorities. Of course, your children may also deliberately search for pornographic content. They might do this for various reasons. And remember, it is perfectly normal for them to be curious about bodies, about sex and relationships. Sometimes they might look online to find answers to questions that they're too embarrassed to ask. But exposure to pornographic content harms children. Exposure to pornography at a young age may lead to poor mental health, to sexism, sexual violence, and other negative outcomes. And among the other risks, when children view pornography that portrays these abusive acts that you can see on your screen now, they may come to view such behaviour as being normal and acceptable. It's really hard, isn't it, to think about something that your child views at maybe age 11 may have really terrible consequences later on in their relationships 20 years from now. But that's the reality when we're talking about pornography. Back when some of us were children, the only way to access pornography was by embarrassing yourself and buying, a top shelf magazine or a DVD, or embarrassing yourself even further and going into a high street sex shop. But our children don't need to do this. So in a way, we were way better protected than they are now. And with the best will in the world, it is so hard to protect your children from online dangers. Yes, we can look at parental controls, we can look at blocking of websites, etc. But if they really wanted to find something, they will. There are literally hundreds of sites we can direct you to around online safety. Just type it into Google and YouTube, but at their friend's house, their friend's phone or laptop may not have the same safety features, and there's not a lot you can do about stopping them accessing it that way. So it's all very scary, and you might be feeling a bit powerless around some of this about what you can do. So we're going to take you straight back to our basics. These conversations around pornography and sex may feel awkward and embarrassing, but if they can't talk to you or another close and trusted family member or friend, then somebody else not so trusted might fill in the gaps for them. We've just heard that the average age of a child viewing their first online pornography is around 11. So you can never, ever have these conversations too early. Don't let that awkwardness build up until it becomes a taboo subject. If you've managed to build that safe and open environment, then your child may well come to you with questions way earlier than you expect them to. They may start by asking where babies come from, and that may be a really good starting point. We're not looking here for one big sex conversation. It's more of that open, ongoing approach and try to answer questions as your children come to you. Don't tell them off if you find that they've been accessing porn, and try not to instantly take away their device as a punishment. Try to be a little bit more relaxed about it. Give age-appropriate answers. You know, it's okay to say some things are only for adults. Remember that what they might have seen might have scared them, and be reassuring about the confusion emotions that your child might have after seeing explicit content. It is okay to be curious. It's a normal part of growing up, but also be prepared to challenge views that may arise from them watching adult content. Reinforce the message that sex and bodies that they see on screen in a lot of pornography are not realistic. Explain that they can see things like non-consensual sex, which may appear normal or okay, but it's really not. We really don't want our children's first impression of sex to be as distorted as we know that porn can be. You know, for example, I didn't realise that hands are very rarely used when people are online having sex in pornography because they get in the way of the camera. But your 11-year-old's not going to know that. Start conversations as early as you can. Use the correct words for body parts to avoid any confusion, and talk about consent. Maybe share that video that we just watched so that there are no blurring of lines, and encourage them to respect their own and other people's bodies. So our Let's Talk family are going to be running, I think someone's just put it in the chat actually, we're going to be running another session about growing up in a porn culture and helping you to understand the effect that it can have on your children and young people, and how you can build that resilience and having those conversations around it. It's run by two great facilitators from America, and they're going to share all their knowledge and understanding with you around this. So do sign up if you can. I think it's just been put in the chat, the link to do that. So we're going to go back now to the conversation that we started this section with around exploitation. And I just want to talk to you about a few signs that may indicate that a child is being exploited. And again, some of these are normal behaviours that you'll see in your children. We just want you to be looking out for anything that's out of the norm, anything that looks a bit different than usual. So are they leaving home suddenly without an explanation, or returning home unusually late, or even staying out all night? Do you always know where your children are? Look out for unexplained injuries or suspicion of any physical assault. Look out for your children persistently going missing, or are they being asked to be picked up in areas a long way from home that they've got no connection with? Are they secretive about who they're talking to and where they're going? Are they becoming isolated from some of their old friends? Are they having unexplained absences from school? Are you getting phone calls from school to say that your child's missing? Or are they not coming straight home after school? Is there sudden loss of interest in school? You know, were they really interested before, really keen to go to school, and now they're not? Again, as they enter their teens, some of these things are normal behaviour. You're looking out for big differences in what you normally see. Think about significant changes in their emotional well-being. So are they having lots of tummy aches? Are they having eating worries? Are they getting increasingly disruptive or aggressive? Are they using sexual language or gang-related language that you wouldn't normally expect your children to know or use? Think about their access and their use of any alcohol or drugs. Are they displaying any inappropriate sexualized behavior? And is there a big change in their appearance and how they've generally been looking after themselves? And the list I've just given you is absolutely not designed to scare you in any way as parents and carers. It's more the indicators of exploitation can sometimes be mistaken for these normal adolescent behaviours and ignored. So we're back to the message that Chloe and I always give you. It's much easier to spot if something is wrong if you really know your children. Chloe.
Thank you, Emma. Speaking of which, how will you actually know if something is wrong? Do we always really listen to and hear what our children are saying? I'm just going to show you a really quick clip now. I think it's by Leicestershire Police, but it's just a good reminder of the importance of really listening to our children.
They'll sort themselves out, you know. Your mum and dad. Where are you off to, love?
I'm holding drugs for a bloke out there. I've already been out to his car 4 times tonight.
Why's that then?
I'm helping him move crack round the village, Nan. He says I've got no choice now.
Are you listening?
That's nice, love.
Criminals are using children across the UK.
Missed you last week, Danny.
Any child can be exploited.
Nice boots. They new?
And forced into carrying out crimes.
Sell about 200 quid of weed a week. Just to keep people off my back.
Right, you're at front with Ash today, yeah?
They don't always see themselves as victims.
Bit late to be chatting, isn't it, love?
And won't always act like victims.
Darren said he might need the gun back. He's freaking out.
Right. Shall I leave the nightlight on? Keep the monsters away?
It's okay. I'll use it if I have to.
Not like you to be late, Alex.
I'm missing 3 drop-offs right now, miss. That's £200 they're going to want back. Which I haven't got!
Better get to your lesson.
Look out for changes in behaviour. Increased messages and calls. Or new belongings you don't recognise. It's up to everyone to know the signs and to really listen before it's too late.
Alex?
Are you listening?
Okay, so how can we prepare for our preteens becoming teenagers? Firstly, be honest with your children about their bodies and about sex. Answer any questions that they may have in a really age-appropriate way. These conversations can happen at any time, so do try and be prepared for them. There's every chance that they'll find this conversation maybe awkward and unpleasant, as might you. But knowing that you're there to help them if they need it can be a really big comfort if they do. Besides, absolutely any information or advice that you're able to give can make all of the difference when it comes to them making good decisions for their future. Try and use the right words for body parts from a young age to stop any confusion later on. So think about those biologically appropriate words that describe exactly what they're wanting to. Develop an open and a trusting relationship so that your child can talk to you about absolutely anything. Try and never react badly if you hear something that you don't like. It will make them a lot less likely to share with you again for fear of your reaction. Differentiate between safe secrets, so things like a birthday party, for example, and unsafe secrets, so things that might make them feel scared or maybe uncomfortable, and make it okay to tell those unsafe secrets. And respect your young person's boundaries when it comes to things like getting changed or bathing. As your child grows into a teenager, they will become more self-conscious and will want more privacy. Accept this, accept that it's normal, and respect it. Ensure safe use of the internet. Safety plan is in the toolkit that accompanies tonight's session, so do have a look through that, but we will be talking about online safety a bit more next week. Respect that no means no, and ensure that your child knows that they can say no to anything that they don't feel comfortable with. So to unwanted touching, for example, even if that is from their favourite aunt or their favourite uncle. They have the last say over who touches their body. The NSPCC has a really great pants resource for younger children if you want to check that out. And talk about consent. We've seen that really friendly video earlier today that talks about consent in a really age-appropriate way. So talk about that, maybe show them the video and make it that regular conversation. And safety plan. It's important that everyone feels safe. And we do have a whole page in our toolkit that's dedicated to kind of general safety planning as opposed to just online safety planning. React and respond. So be open about your worries and what you're seeing. You are not expected to have all of the answers as parents. If you feel that something is wrong, then you're probably right, and you need to trust your gut and act upon it. A simple conversation may make things that little bit clearer for you or for your young person. And try not to take things too personally. It may not be you that they're angry with at all. And listen, you may not like what you hear, but it is important to really hear what your child is trying to tell you. Try not to react, as this could be the only time that they tell you something. And again, if you respond negatively, it does give them that message that you're not a safe person to share their worries with. Check your facts. Ask those open-ended, curious questions. Did you hear them right? Are you sure what they're trying to tell you? Tell them that they've done the right thing by sharing with you and really try and reassure them that what's happened to them absolutely is not their fault. And just be aware that you might not need to fix anything immediately. Put the kettle on, grab both of you a biscuit and start unpicking what you've been told. Make sure that your child knows that you are taking them seriously, but you're not about to confront maybe the gang or the abusive person, and that you will include them in all of the next steps. What does your child want to happen? We don't want to make life any harder for them. Be child-led as much as you can. There are obviously times where you will need to fully take the lead as their parent, but make sure that your child has some form of a voice in this. Other people are likely to be taking their power away, so try not to do this too. And report and research. Contact the police on 999 if you need an immediate response, or 101 if it's not that urgent. They will also signpost you to support in your local area should you need it. Another place that you can report to is school, so the safeguarding lead at the child's school, for example. So I know tonight's been really scary so far. We've shared some really scary information so far, but please remember that this will probably not happen to your family, but the fact also is that it might. So just remember what you can do as a family to try and lessen those odds and how much the little things really do matter. I'm going to hand back over to Emma now. Emma.
Thanks, Chloe. So leading on from what Chloe has just said, it's so exciting, isn't it, to think that your child and your children are going to shape and change the world that we live in, and that their future and their opinions and mindsets really are the future of our world. So we want you to think for a minute about what are your thoughts around that? And secondly, what are your children's thoughts? And do you have an influence over that? Does what you think really matter to your children? So absolutely it does. So we want to talk for a minute about stereotypes. So stereotypes can affect every part of life. They contribute towards poor mental health in young people, higher male suicide rates, low self-esteem, and bad stereotyping often allows this culture of toxic masculinity and violence against women and girls. Much of this is a societal issue, but you can make a huge difference at home by challenging some of the phrases that you can see on your screen now. Role model good behaviour. Point out successful challenges of stereotypes. We don't need any answers to this here now in front of you. They're just for you to think about where these messages come from and what messages they might be giving to your children. Sometimes it can be hard for us as parents and carers if our child is questioning their identity or their sexual orientation, especially if these are new terms and ideas for us. You might feel unsure about how to help your child with some of the questions that they come to you with. You might find it hard to know how to talk to them and explain things to extended family who might not be as supportive. Some parents may also feel angry or upset when they find out that their child is not necessarily conforming to or following the pathways that they had expected. Whatever you're feeling, it's important to remember that having questions about all of the confusing things in their lives can be such a stressful and lonely experience for some children and young people. They often feel like no one understands what it's like for them. They worry about being accepted, and they really worry about how their friends and family, especially you, will react. They won't have the answers to all the questions. You won't have the answers to all their questions. So again, try and go back to basics. Always listen to them and try not to react or to judge them. It's okay to admit that you don't always understand what they're going through and to offer to seek support together. Find out as much as you possibly can along this journey with your children, but always consider what you say influences your children. Well done for sticking with us. We've just started to explore some of the challenges that your children are going to be facing, and it may have brought up some worries for you, especially if you've noticed some of the warning signs that we've discussed. So we just wanted to leave you with a few support options that you or your young person can reach out to if needed. Feel free to take a screenshot, obviously, now of these services. And we talk a lot, don't we, about the dangers of the internet and how dodgy it can be. But actually, sometimes when you're just trying to do a bit of Googling and find out support services, it can be really helpful. So first up is Childline, which is a very famous support service for our children. It's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it is a totally anonymous service. And although the chat line is for children, the website is full of great information for parents, and there is also an online chat facility. The next one down is an organisation which aims to end suicide in young people. And again, they've got both a call line and a text line that children can reach out to. Young Minds is next up. So they are open to anyone with a child under 25. And so this again is both for your children and for you. They primarily have a focus on mental health concerns, and again they've got a fabulous website just full of resources and strategies for both you and your young people. Fear Free is next on the list. They used to be called Splits, and I think they've been called Fearless as well recently. But this is the domestic abuse support service. So they support children and families who are affected by domestic abuse. And they also have young people's workers. And although that service doesn't start until 14, they do have a great transitions toolkit, which helps support conversations that we've encouraged you to have around relationships when those children start going up, when your children start going up to secondary school, and all those new conversations and things that they are suddenly exposed to. And then Women's Aid, again, very similar to Fear Free. They offer support around unhealthy relationships. All of these are great resources to start these conversations. And then finally, we would really recommend Parent Talk, which is run by Action for Children. Lots and lots of information at just about every stage of your child's development. And they also have one-to-one chat messaging available. So thank you so much for coming along to tonight's session. It's been great having you all here, and we really hope that you can take away something useful from it. We appreciate that it has been tricky and we have discussed some serious topics tonight. We just want to give a bit of a shout out to the other course that we're running, which is our Let's Talk Teenagers course. So in that we go into a lot more in depth around teenage relationships, family strengthening, role modeling. And next week is our last session where we will be focusing on that emotional well-being and self-care. And the QR code is there now if you wanted to sign up. So that's next Tuesday night. And then hopefully we're going to welcome you back again next Thursday for our last one of this, our preteens. I promise you next week is a little bit gentler. We're going to be looking at online safety and safety planning. We're going to be looking at mental health, and we're also going to be looking again at family strengthening and some of those self-care strategies. So that's self-care strategies for you and for your children. And again, the QR code is just there on your screen now. Do keep an eye on our socials for updates on future sessions and resources, but you definitely deserve a cup of tea tonight, maybe even a couple of biscuits. Unwind a little bit before you go to bed. Try and find your child, give them that extra long hug that we've talked about before. You know, hugging somebody for 20 seconds releases all kinds of well-being hormones that will lower yours and their stress levels. So tell them why you're doing it and try and hang on to them if you can, with consent, for 20 seconds. And then our final slide tonight, please, is just our feedback slide. We really enjoy running these sessions for you, and the more feedback that we get, the more we can tailor them to what parents and carers really need. So we're going to leave that up for a little while. Thank you so much for joining us. We do apologise for our internet dipping out a bit at times. I'm not quite sure what's going on there. But thank you so much, and hopefully we will see you again next week. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. It's such a privilege to talk to you all. And we do really appreciate your feedback. Have a lovely evening. Sorry that it's been so tough this week. It is our toughest week, so you've survived it. And we'll be back next week with a much gentler session. We look forward to speaking to you all then. Thanks, everyone. Good night.